Kim Gogan, and I'm the 10th grade biology teacher here at Newport High School. I'm going to share with you some information about a really fun trip I did this spring for 25 days. I was selected to be what is called a NOAA Teacher at Sea by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Most people know NOAA because of the weather. You'd see them all the time on the Weather Channel, but I got to know them from the science that they do. NOAA is one of the 7 uniformed services. It does a lot of science all over the U.S., and it also offers teachers many different opportunities, like Teacher at Sea, which I was able to do, Teacher in the Lab, and also Teacher in the Air. This is to help teach teachers about these different environments so that they can bring it back to students in the classroom. The mission of the Teacher at Sea program is to give teachers information about our ocean planet and ocean science, to help teachers have a better understanding of jobs and careers on the ocean, and to increase how well teachers understand the environment by giving them a cool research experience. I was selected to go in April here out in the North Atlantic on a boat called the NOAA ship Gordon Gunter. The Gordon Gunter is 265 feet long. It's about 5 stories high. It's a reconditioned Navy ship, and we were in the North Atlantic Ocean for 25 days in April. So the North Atlantic Ocean, where did we go in the North Atlantic? We went to a place called George's Bank and the Great Southwest Channel. The Great Southwest Channel, and if you can look at the slide with the happy faces and the stars, the Great Southwest Channel is about 150 to 250 miles off the coast of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Maine, south of the Gulf of Maine. You can see where we are. I've given a picture of a little point of reference to where New Hampshire is, with the little smiley faces. And the 2 points on the stars are called the Great Southwest Channel, and that's the area that we spent the most time on George's Bank. On the other channel, on the other side, you can see that there's a whole bunch of lines. That slide was taken from the Protected Species website, and that shows all the different areas that the Protected Species Division actually monitors for different things like turtles, whales, dolphins, seabirds, and other animals. We were actually on the top half of the red squiggly line, once again, right off of George's Bank. So who runs the Gordon Gunter? It's the NOAA Corps that run the Gordon Gunter. These people are trained specifically to run NOAA research vessels. The NOAA Corps folks have to go through an intensive training similar to that of the Coast Guard, and it doesn't matter if they're boy or girl, both can do that. And they have a degree in the field of science, which is kind of cool. These are special folks or armed services folks that all have to have a related degree in science. So when they are running the ship for the research scientists, they actually may have some sort of a background in that as well, or at least something similar. What is interesting to me about that is that they were just as excited to go to some of the places and find some of the things as the scientists were on the ship. So I worked with a large group of scientists. Most of those scientists were from Massachusetts. They worked right out of Woods Hole, Newport, Rhode Island, and a few of them came from far away. We had one birder who was from Canada. We also had one subcontractor who was a marine mammal observer who was actually from Hawaii. Most of these people and scientists had done these types of trips many, many times. I was probably one of the ones that it was their first adventure. There were oceanographers, marine mammal observers, who most of those have a degree in marine biology, trained birders or ornithologists, and acoustic scientists. And I'll tell you a little bit more about all those scientists as we go on. One of the first things that I was able to do when I got there was to get my gear. And if you notice in all three of the pictures around the group of the scientists, I'm wearing what's called a Mustang suit. And a Mustang suit is part flotation, it's bright orange in most cases, or partly orange, and it's made to endure extreme cold weather. We were in some pretty cold temperatures and generally outside and exposed to the elements, so I was really happy that they gave me and assigned me a Mustang suit to wear. So what did I learn? One of the first things that I did was oceanography, where we study the Earth's oceans. I was actually in charge of something called a bongo net. It's called a bongo net because it's shaped like bongo drums. And we did two types of bongo nets. We did larger bongo nets, as you see in some of those pictures. They're two circular rings that taper down to something at the end called a cod end. We did a large one and a small one to catch all different types of species. So most of the time we were trying to catch plankton, and sometimes we were trying to catch fish. The smaller nets on the top that you see there in the center picture are there to try to catch small species or baby fish. My job was to help to get the nets in the water, and then we would lower the nets down to about 10 meters off the bottom of the ocean, depending on where we were. All that was controlled by computers and sensors that are hooked up to the bongo nets. After we would lower them down, we would pull them back up slowly, and then you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, I'm washing the bongo nets. That's my scientist, Jerry Prezioso from Newport, Rhode Island, who was my assigned mentor and leader. He and I would wash all the plankton or whatever we happened to catch in those nets down to the very end of the net called the cod end of the net. The next thing that we would do is you can see those nets get washed into these big sieves. And from the sieves, we would take them to the wet lab that is inside the boat, and we would put them into containers and preserve them. So down in the right-hand corner of this slide, you'll notice a big yellow arrow. One of our oceanographers, Betsy, is holding up some of the samples of the plankton that are preserved. We actually would preserve them in different types of formaldehyde. Those samples would be sent to a lab at a later date, and they would go through and count all the different plankton and all the different types of organisms that they may have found in the sample. So the trip on the boat isn't the time where they actually count all that stuff, at least not on this trip. If it were fish that they would put back into the ocean, that would be different. But with the plankton, they're just taking different samples. So the oceanographers work during the day and they work during the night. I was on the daytime team that was primarily in charge of doing 3 bongos a day at 6 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the middle of the day, and then 6 o'clock at night, or as soon as the marine mammal observers were done. And then the nighttime oceanographers did different oceanography. They did something called a beam trawl. A beam trawl is a big net, if you see in the upper left-hand of the slide. The net goes down, and a trawl is something that fishermen used to catch fish too, but here the scientists were using it to catch samples of things that they could either preserve, or if they were large enough, they would put them back in. They would catch fish, like in the top right, there's a flounder. We saw some squid, some eels. And if you look at the picture with the ruler, you can get an idea of the size of these things. The largest flounder there is about 5 centimeters long, versus the krill that's all the way to the right-hand side, which is only about 3 centimeters long. So these are pretty small creatures. So we found squid, flounder, eels, krill, and down in the bottom right-hand slide, you can see there's a couple bottom fish that we also found beside flounder. a lanternfish, and a hatchetfish. The hatchetfish is one that you may have seen in the movie Finding Nemo. And you can see just to the right of those fish, there's a krill. So if the krill was only about 3 centimeters, that gives you an idea about how big these fish are. And most of these fish are full grown, and they live at the bottom of the ocean all the time where there isn't any light. The other type of oceanography that these folks did is called the bottom grab. It's called a Van Veen bottom grab, and they would drop that big apparatus off the side of the boat, off the same crane that would lower the bongo nets, and it would take a big sample of the muck, all of that muck that you may have smelt if you've ever visited the ocean. And they would bring it aboard and drop it into the buckets. If you look at the bottom of this slide, you can see one of the oceanographers there taking the beach muck, the bottom muck, we call it benthic soil, and putting it through sieves as well, and then washing it with a hose, and they would repeat that 4 or 5 times. Some of the things that we would find would be mostly shells and pieces of shells, whether they were oyster shells or conch shells or even little sand dollars, but there weren't as many organisms that we would find in the benthic soil. The other type of science the nighttime oceanographers did was they had a piece of equipment called a VPR, or a video plankton recorder. The video plankton recorder is basically a giant underwater camera, and that giant underwater camera takes pictures, thousands of pictures a second, of all of the microscopic underwater sea life. You can see here are some pictures that were shared with me by the scientists of some of the plankton that was taken. A hydromedusa, that's similar to what we would think of as a jellyfish. It looks similar to that, but it's a little different. One called a sea butterfly, a salp, and sometimes the salp are found in large chains, hooked all together. And then there's another one called a phoronid eating a salp. And a phoronid, the top right in the bigger slide, the clear organism is called a phoronid. He was actually what was used to model the alien in the movie The Aliens. They used one of these to make that alien. He looks really alien-like if you could see him standing up or swimming around. And that phoronid is inside of a salp. They'll swim inside of that. So these are all microscopic organisms that you need a very high power microscope and a very, very fast underwater camera called a video plankton recorder to catch on film. We also there's also some live pictures there. You can see of an amphipod, a very common organism that we found in our bongo nets, the krill, and again that phoronid, that really creepy alien-like creature. So what else did I learn? One of the other things that I learned was some basic marine biology from our marine mammal observers. One of the things that the other group of scientists would do is they would spend all day looking for whales and dolphins. We averaged about 50, 60, 70 whales and dolphins a day on a good day, on most days. And we even had one day where we saw 171 whales and dolphins. That was actually the best day. So what they were looking for, well, first of all, they used these big things called big eyes. As you can see, they're mounted on a pole, and they're nothing but a big, giant set of binoculars and giant cameras. So once they would find a whale or a dolphin, if it stayed on the surface long enough, most of the folks were trained photographers or professional photographers as well, and they would try to get pictures of the organism so they could actually even identify not just their species, but for example, when we were in Cape Cod Bay, we took some pictures of some of the right whales and sent them back to the lab, and they were even able to identify what they had given as names. One of them that we saw was named Thorny, and Thorny is known to visit that area, and they can tell by the different markings on the whales who they are and how long they've been in the Cape Cod area. So here you can see there are some pictures shared with me from the photographers of the right whales. If you look at the top right picture, there's a right whale. Right whales migrate and hang out in Cape Cod Bay in the spring frequently. And the thing about right whales is that they are endangered, and they are very, very slow swimmers, and they don't get out of the way of boats. And so the people that work for the Protected Species Division, these scientists, they help monitor where the right whales are. They post where they are along with some of the scientific equipment online. You can actually go to the Right Whale Listening Network and track where the right whales are in high concentration. And they also notify the Coast Guard and other folks when they're in high concentrations so that boats won't go near them. They can make them go very slow and bring the speed down of the boat. So the most common whales that we saw were the right whales, especially when we were in and around Cape Cod Bay. Humpback whales, we saw quite a few of those, and pilot whales. We also saw lots of other types of whales while we were out there, but these were probably like the beaked whales. These were the most common ones that we found when we were out there that we saw frequently. The scientists wouldn't always see all of the whale. Sometimes they might just see the top fin, what's called the dorsal fin, come up and break the surface. They might see what's called a fluke, or the tail of the whale, or what's also called, if you look in the bottom right-hand part of the slide, a blow. And what I thought was really cool is that these scientists have been doing this so long that they can identify the different types of whales just by the shape of the blow, or the spout that comes up when the whale surfaces and they blow to clear their passages. The scientists, even from 1.5 miles to 2 miles away on the big eyes, they could actually say which type of whale that was in most cases. So I thought that was pretty impressive. I was beginning to identify them when the whales came close, and maybe I could see a fin or a tail, but even then, I think it must take years and years to be able to do some of the identification that the marine mammal observers did. So what other cool animals did we see? We saw tons of dolphins. It was one of the other species that the marine mammals observers were looking for and trying to survey and keep track of and count. The cool thing about dolphins is when there's a whole, what's called a pod of dolphins, they would come close to the boat. They're very curious, they love boats and humans, and they like to check the boat out. So they would come, and you can see some of those pictures of the dolphins that would swim close to the boat, and they would go straight to the bow of the boat, and they would jump like one over the other, like they were playing. And then they would go off to the side, and they would do little acrobats and come out of the water and do flips and spins and what looked like cartwheels, and then go back to the bow and play again. And you can see there's a picture actually of my roommate, because I took the picture, hanging her head over the bow of the boat. It's one of my favorite places to be during the whole trip, was over the bow of the boat. When the organisms would come close enough, you could see that we would get pictures of them. This is actually just called the common white-sided dolphin. So why were we there? Why were these scientists doing what they were doing? There was lots of different science going on. There was the oceanography that I've talked about so far, and the surveying of the whales and dolphins that the marine mammal observers were doing. We were there because we were under a marine mammal assessment program for protected species, or the AMAPS for short. This is a multi-year project that has a large number of scientists from a variety of organizations whose main goal is to document the relationship and distribution and abundance of cetaceans, which are whales, sea turtles, seabirds, cetaceans would also include dolphins within the study area. The study area is what I showed you earlier, all the different lines that were shown from Canada all the way down to Virginia. They were also studying these organisms relative to their physical, biological environment. So not only did they want to go out and do what I've showed you so far, count the whales and dolphins, but that's why we were also collecting all the plankton species and counting the fish and taking bottom samples. So they don't just want to know how many whales are there and whether or not that population of whales is changing, or dolphins, from year to year. But they also want to know if there's been a change in the environment. Is there something in the soil that they hadn't found before? Are there less plankton? Because that's what the whales and dolphins feed on for most of them, or even the fish. So they're taking all these samples so they can collect all the data about the whales and dolphins and seabirds in their environment. So what else did we see while we were there? Well, we did have a team of birders. There were 2 of them. They were on call throughout the whole day, and they kept track of all the different birds. I didn't spend a lot of time with them, so I couldn't really tell you a lot of the birds that they saw, although I do know that they saw a very rare petrel, which was never been seen where we were located before, and it was only one of like 4 to be seen in Canada, because at that point in time we were in Canadian waters. So that was kind of a really exciting thing for the birders. Of course, we saw your regular your gannets and ducks, sea ducks, eider ducks, and seagulls and egrets, and lots of the common seabirds, but we also saw a lot of other cool seabirds that I was able to learn. One of the other really cool things, besides basking sharks that we saw, that are very hard to photograph because they just breach, which means to jump out of the water real quickly, was a fish called the moa moa. And I grew up on an island off the coast of Maine, and I have never seen a moa moa myself, and I think they're generally only found in the area that we went, which is on the Gray Southwest Channel off Georges Bank. It's a huge 2,000-pound fish. They're very slow, and they have this fin that when it sticks up out of the water, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, there's a fin that's sticking out that kind of looks like a shark. But the way you can tell a moa moa from a shark is that sharks swim really fast, and you may only see their fin come up for a split second. Moa moas are huge, one of the largest bony fish in the ocean, and they swim really slow. So you can see that they're a giant fish, and you could tell that the fin wouldn't be moving really sleek and fast and going in and out or darting, that it would just be sort of flopping back and forth, maybe coming to the surface. And so I was able to learn how to identify a moa moa fin from a whale fin, primarily by the speed and how it's kind of lackadaisically just kind of flops all over the place. What else did I learn? I was really lucky that there was also another group of scientists called acoustic scientists, and they had these equipments called acoustic hydrophone arrays. A hydrophone array is basically a microphone that can go underwater in a big giant tube, and I believe there were 12 of them, and in the center picture up on the reel you can see those are the microphones, the underwater microphones. While all the people were doing their oceanography and while they were doing their birding and mammal watching, the acoustic scientists always had this hydrophone array in the water at all times. Lots of times they could see, they could hear the whales and dolphins that the marine mammal observers couldn't see, and they could also help identify ones that maybe they couldn't see very well and pick up and even sometimes tell how many were in an area where maybe the weather wasn't good or the waves were really big, so that the marine mammals observers weren't able to see that very well. So when we were listening to the whales, we would have these headphones on, and we were able to hear whatever sounds, and you can hear a lot farther than you can see. I believe it was about 4 miles that they could see, that they could hear, whereas we could only see close to 2 miles. It also would come up on a screen, 2 screens, and show the location and the distance of the whale or the dolphin. And here they were primarily listening for high-pitched noises, or whales and dolphins that make high-pitched sounds, and that would also create an image on the computer screen as well as of what that sound looks like too, and you can see that sort of on the computer. The other type of science that they did was they would deploy or put into the water these things called MARUs, or Marine Autonomous Recording Units. The MARUs are something that stay on the bottom of the ocean for 6 months. And when they stay down there, they are trying to pick up low frequencies, like the right whales primarily. They were trying to pick up sounds that the acoustic array couldn't pick up, so it was a nice complement. The MARUs stay at the bottom of the ocean for 6 months. They're connected by computer, so when the scientists want to retrieve them, they send a signal to the MARU, and it's got a little piece of wire that will burn off and let the MARU come to the surface, and then they can locate it with a GPS tracker. So some of the whales and dolphins that we heard, this is one of the sites that are in the PowerPoint, that you can go online and you can actually listen to some of these sounds as well. This is the common, short-beaked common dolphin. And on this website, it also shows you some of the pictures of what those look like as well. And so one of the ones that we saw most frequently was the common dolphin. We also would hear the pilot whale. So this is what a pilot whale would sound like. And you can see what the pilot whales So you can see what the pilot whale's sound actually looks like on the computer as well. I was very fortunate enough that the scientist that I worked with, Jerry Prezioso, had worked with teachers at sea before. And he asked NOAA if we could do something special for me and my students. And he ordered 2 things called drifter buoys. Drifter buoys are these buoys that actually follow the ocean current, and you can track them, and NOAA provides a lot of activities that you can do with your students with these drifter buoys that also relate to not only ocean currents and studying Earth's oceans, but climate change as well. So you can see there's some pictures of me there decorating the drifter buoys. Before I left, I had my daughter, who goes to Disnard Elementary, her class and my own biology students make a lot of stickers to put all over the buoys before we sent them off into the ocean. So here I am decorating my drifter buoys, and after that, the scientist Jerry Prezioso and I took each of the buoys and we launched them over the side of the boat. We did this when we were at the farthest southeast part of our journey, so when we were the most south and east along Georges Bank, along the Great Southwest Channel. That way we could monitor where the drifter buoys would go, and perhaps we can find out where the North Atlantic Ocean current actually travels from that point. I've been able to log on and find out that those buoys have actually traveled to the south and to the west, and we will continue to track those with my classroom for 400 days, and next fall when the students return to school, I have some activities that are designed to help them understand about the ocean currents. So it wasn't all work on the boat, although sometimes I did work day and night, but there was lots of things that we also got to do. We could go to the flag bridge and just enjoy the view. When the marine mammal observers weren't using the big eyes, we were allowed to just look on them and see what we could see. I spent a lot of time on my computer because I had to write lots of blogs. I was supposed to do 2 blogs a week for Teacher at Sea. You can actually see them at the Teacher at Sea website. They'll stay on there for several years, and it tells a little bit more if you're interested about all of the science that I did. It goes into a much more in depth, and it has a lot of the links to the different websites and like my buoys as well. that you could check out. When we weren't doing those things, once in a while we would watch movies because we didn't get regular TV, or we would play cribbage. It's something very common that people, I guess, do at sea. Cribbage is a very popular game on most of the research vessels, and right off the bat, within the first 2 days, they established a cribbage tournament, and we had a lot of fun playing cards. And sometimes, when it wasn't too busy, I would visit the bridge or the wheelhouse where the NOAA Corps people were. There's a picture there you can see on the bottom right of me talking to the captain, or listening to the captain teach some of the NOAA Corps about whatever he was trying to teach them with the boat. I think here it was how to back the boat up to the dock. And I would also go up there, I would learn a little bit of navigation or some of the equipment, so I got to spend some time learning about ships as well from the NOAA Corps. It wasn't always great weather when we were out there. If you can recall, we were out there in April. One of the things that I learned about being an oceanographer or marine mammal observer or anyone that would have to go outside and work outside is that you encounter things like the weather. And we encountered actually 3 major storms when we were out there, and all 3 of them, well, the first 2, we were able to tell that they were going to be big storms before they actually hit us, and we would have to return and come off of Georges Bank and anchor the ship down off of Cape Cod Bay near Provincetown, where it's safe and sheltered from the storms. We had to do that on 2 different occasions. This 3rd storm really came in without warning, and that actually ended up being the largest storm. It was the first time in my life where I got to experience 40-foot waves and 110-mile-an-hour winds in a ship. And there's not much you can do except for lay in your bed because you can't really even walk around. But the NOAA Corps did a great job. The ship only sustained a little bit of damage to its rudder, and it did knock out the satellite and internet for a little while, but it wasn't anything serious, and the NOAA Corps people knew exactly what they were doing to get us safely through that storm. One of my favorite parts was twice a day. You can't even tell which is which anymore. I got to see sunrise, and I also got to see sunset. Like I said, we did work at, my job was at 6 in the morning, 11 and 6 at night, and then also I would stay up often to work with the nighttime oceanographers, so that had to be, besides watching the dolphins off the bow of the ship, one of my most favorite parts. My experience was pretty amazing, and one of the great things, besides all the science that I got to learn, was the fact that when I come back, I get to share it with everybody. And the more sharing that I can do with the community, with my students, I also got to go to Disnard Elementary School and do a presentation for the kindergarten through 5th grade students there. The more that I can share, the more people get to learn about the Earth's oceans, some of the cool things that science do, who NOAA is, and who the NOAA Corps people are. So I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the Earth's oceans and about the different type of science that happens on some of the research vessels right here off of our own Atlantic coast.